Good morning to you. I'm speaking to you about 8:30 in the morning on Saturday. Here we are on what is often known as Holy Week. And so, as we commemorate the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, this is, of course, the day where he was in the grave. And there's all sorts of uncertainty and upheaval all throughout Jerusalem and that entire world over there. The followers of Jesus are confused and trying to figure out what's going on. Where's their life going from here? What's going to happen now? We've been with this Jesus of Nazareth for the last 3 years, and now he's dead. And the governing authorities, which this is what our series is all about, the Christian and the governing authorities, they're nervous, wondering what's going to happen. Is this going to lead to some kind of political revolt? And quite frankly, some of them are pretty nervous about, is Jesus even going to stay in this tomb? There's just so many things that he said and did that just could not be explained. And so there's just all kinds of nervousness. And anyway, I just thought it was fitting to kind of take a step back from this series that we're doing. And I really should have done this at the beginning. This really should have been an introduction. But just to say some things about the book of Romans in general, and in very, 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 very general terms, and how that relates to us and the government, and just kind of came to some things that astounded me, that humbled me, that even gave me goosebumps, thinking about the history of this book, not just the Bible in general, but Romans specifically, which we're reading from. Romans 13, 1 through 7 has been the topic of this YouTube series on the Christian and the government. But I'm just amazed at the majestic nature of this book. It's as if our minds are lifted out of the American culture that we live in to this very high place. It's almost like the difference between, I live here in Chehalis, Washington, and in the valley in western Washington, but it's much like the experience that I do, not as often as I'd like to, but that I get to do when I go up into the mountains and I climb, Mount Shasta or Mount Rainier or Mount Adams, one of these Cascade volcanoes, and we climb up and out of the tree line where the air becomes thin and you start to see less and less vegetation, and pretty soon you climb above the tree line and eventually you're up there where there's nothing but rocks and ice and snow. And it's like the difference between those two things, just a different smells, different sights, different feeling, just the majestic nature of it, of a place like that just surrounds you. Romans is very much like that. And I got to thinking back to William Tyndale. He committed the high crime of translating the Bible into English so that people like you and me could read it. William Tyndale was converted reading Romans, the book that is the topic of our discussion. He escaped the ceremonial legalisms of Rome through Romans. And those of you who are familiar with Erasmus and Tyndale, those two characters of that Reformation era, you know the chasm of difference. As far as we know, Erasmus was never saved, and yet we have great assurance that Tyndale was. And he said that Romans was the most dangerous book in the Bible. And the Roman Catholic Church said that Romans was the most dangerous book in the Bible. They said that ordinary people may not read Romans. They may not. And we will burn people at the stake to ensure that they don't. And in 1526, that is precisely what happened to Tyndale when he completed translating this book. The book of Romans, when read with spiritual eyes, when God gives people eyes to see, and the book of Romans is read, it explodes things like purgatory and penance and indulgences and baptismal regeneration and ex opere operato. For those of you who know that Latin phrase, it means ex means out of, and then opere and operato just sounds like our English word operation, and it means that there's an operation that takes place, or operation occurs just by doing the operation. Another, baptism is not simply a reflection of something that's happened to you. Communion is not simply representative of something that's been done, but there's actually power in baptism. There's actually power in communion, and that was, people were killed for speaking against that, and it's actually creeping back into evangelicalism in different ways today. Romans exploded papal infallibility and transubstantiation and the treasury of merit and the priesthood of man and the mediatorial role of Mary, and just a glorious liberty came about all over Western Europe from reading Romans. And Romans and Galatians especially were to be avoided at all costs, the Vatican said. And they said, let us burn people rather than let Romans be read. But you cannot hide Mount Rainier. You cannot hide Mount Shasta, if I can use that analogy again. It's there, and it can't be hidden, and it's there for us to see. And God has been very, very merciful to us, giving us unfettered access to this book, and this book in general, and especially the book of Romans. And people, William Tyndale, I've been mentioning him. William Tyndale was burned by the governing authorities so that he could translate Romans 13, 1 through 7 into English, so that you could know what God says about your relationship with the governing authorities. Think about that. He was burned by the governing authorities so that you could know what God says about your relationship with the governing authorities. Think about the very gospel. I mean, right now today we're commemorating that Jesus is in this tomb. Tomorrow we're going to remember that he rose out of it. How did he get into that tomb in the first place? Because he was submissive to the governing authorities. Like if you don't have a place in your mind, in your heart, in your theology for Romans 13, 1 through 7, you don't have a place for the gospel. The reason why we have the ability to be reconciled to God is because Jesus Christ, the Son of God, was submissive to the governing authorities. And the reason why you can read it in a language that you can understand is because William Tyndale defied the governing authorities and yet was submissive to them at the same time, even unto death. He went like a lamb before his shearers is silent. He didn't even open his mouth hardly. Most of those reformers that would rebel against things and be killed for it were incredibly polite and incredibly submissive in every other way that they possibly could be. They were not revolutionaries at all. Their level of submission and respect towards the governing authorities would blow our minds today. And so I just hope that you can kind of grab on to the preciousness of Romans and the preciousness that it's in your language, and more than anything else, as we think about yesterday, Good Friday, and tomorrow, Resurrection Day, and just this Holy Week, that you can remember and realize that because Jesus lived out Romans 13 is the only reason why there is a gospel.